If the color blue is a symbol of brotherhood, why is it the last thing so many young men see before they die at the hands of their own brothers? In the hyper-localized geography of south-central Los Angeles, the Blue Nation is a myth that sells records and fuels cinematic tropes, but the data tells a much colder, more clinical story. Statistically, a member of a Crip set in the 21st century is more likely to be killed by another Crip than by a Blood, a Hoover, or any other historic rival. This is the paradox of the decentralized brand, a system that grew so large and so fast that it lost the ability to recognize its own reflection. It is a corporate failure played out in the blood of teenagers. We are witnessing the mechanics of a failed franchise model, where the branding provides the identity, but the lack of a central authority ensures a permanent state of civil war. This is not a story of random chaos. It is an investigation into the logical, structural breakdown of the largest street organization in American history. The infrastructure of the American ghetto is defined by the grid. In Los Angeles, the street numbers do more than guide the mail. They dictate the boundaries of life and death. To an outsider, the sight of a young man in a blue sweatshirt on 60th Street looks identical to one on 83rd Street. They share the same vocabulary, the same history, and the same aesthetic. But in the architecture of the blue fracture, these two individuals are as ideologically and physically opposed as soldiers on opposite sides of a trench. The Crip identity has been hollowed out. It is no longer a protective umbrella. It is a marketing veneer that masks a brutal, micro-level tribalism. When the brand became decentralized, the set became the only sovereign nation that mattered. Consider a Tuesday afternoon on a residential block near Slauson Avenue. A woman in her late 50s, a lifelong resident, watches from her porch. She sees two teenagers approach each other. Both are wearing blue. To a police officer driving by, this is a gathering of the same gang. To the woman on the porch, who has seen the shift over 40 years, she notices the subtle tension. The way one boy's cap is tilted, the specific intersection where they met. She knows that the blue they both wear is a common language they are using to scream at one another. Within seconds, a dispute over a perceived trespass on a sidewalk that both technically own under the banner of the Crip identity, escalates into a physical confrontation. The tragedy of the decentralized set is that there is no Supreme Court to adjudicate this dispute. There is only the immediate, violent application of street-level sovereignty. The anatomy of this fracture begins with the collapse of the central board. In the mid-20th century, the American Mafia operated under the Commission, a body designed to regulate violence because violence is bad for business. If a soldier in the Gambino family killed a soldier in the Genovese family without authorization, he was executed by his own people to maintain the peace. The Crips, by contrast, evolved without a regulatory body. Following the incarceration or death of early foundational figures in the late 1970s, the organization underwent a process of radical cellular division. By 1980, the Crip identity had split into two primary warring factions: the neighborhood Crips, or Deuces, and the 8 Tray gangsters, or Trays. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was a fundamental schism that redefined the mechanics of the American street. This schism created a set-tripping code, a logic where the street number supersedes the Blue Alliance. The neighborhood Crips, NHC, centered around the 60s, 50s, and 40s, adopted a philosophy of traditionalism and territorial policing. The 8 Tray gangsters, ETG, represented a more aggressive, expansionist model. When these two ideologies collided over a personal dispute in 1979, the Blue Nation died. What replaced it was a system of micro-warfare. In this system, the proximity of a rival is measured in yards, not miles. When your greatest enemy wears your same color and lives 3 blocks away, the level of paranoia is constant. It turns the neighborhood into a panopticon where every resident is a potential target and every alleyway is a front line. The economics of the set, what we might call the blue ledger, further complicates the possibility of peace. Unlike a traditional corporation, a Crip set does not receive funding from a headquarters. Each set is an independent startup. They must generate their own revenue to fund their own local armories. This leads to the taxation of the set. In many neighborhoods, Sets will tax or rob other Crips sets to survive. A 15-year-old on 67th Street needs a firearm to protect his corner. He cannot go to a central warehouse. He looks to the nearest source of wealth, which is often a rival Crip set on 71st Street. The result is a predatory economic cycle where the blue brand survives by consuming its own assets. In a small apartment off Vermont Avenue, a mother counts the remaining bills from her paycheck. Her son is in the next room, folding a blue bandana. She knows the bandana doesn't represent a brotherhood. It represents a debt. To stay in the set, her son must contribute to the pot, the collective fund for bail money and weapons. This money doesn't come from a job at a local grocery store. It comes from the work on the corner, often at the expense of other young men in the same situation. The blue ledger is a zero-sum game. For one set to prosper, another must be depleted. The civilian population trapped in these zones becomes the collateral tax. They pay in the form of property value, physical safety, and the psychological toll of living in a permanent war zone. We must also analyze the ritual of the walk. To the uninitiated, the sea walk is a dance popularized by music videos. In the forensics of street politics, however, the walk is a tactical marking of the soil. It is a physical manifestation of the decentralized model. When a member walks on a rival's territory, he is not dancing. He is stomping out the graffiti of a rival set and replacing it with his own presence. It is a visual, hostile takeover. This ritual signifies that the revenue-generating potential of that specific corner now belongs to a new faction. The walk is a communication tool used in a communication void. Because there is no central board to negotiate territory, the only way to signal a change in ownership is through a physical, public display of disrespect. This communication void is perhaps the most lethal element of the decentralized set. In the mafia or the cartels, high-level leaders can meet at a neutral location to chill a situation before it turns into a full-scale war. In the world of the Crips, every 15-year-old with a blue rag is his own CEO. There is no chain of command that can stop a hothead from firing into a crowd on 83rd Street. Once that first shot is fired, the logic of the set dictates an immediate, equal, or greater response. The older generation, often referred to as big homies, find themselves in a position of powerless influence. They can offer advice, they can preach peace, but they cannot issue an order that a 16-year-old is bound to respect. The youth are the labor force of this system, and because they are the ones doing the dying, they feel entitled to make the decisions. The result is a permanent state of asymmetric micro-warfare. It is a war of attrition where there is no king to negotiate with and no headquarters to shut down. If the police arrest the leader of a specific set, the set simply fragments further, creating even smaller, more volatile cells. This is why the American ghetto remains a high-turnover labor market for the prison system. The blue brand does not require a stable leadership to survive. It only requires a steady supply of young men seeking identity and protection. The brand thrives on the very chaos that destroys its members. Let us look at the reality of the non-player. For the shop owner on the corner of Florence and Normandy, the blue fracture is not a sociological theory. It is a daily risk management exercise. He knows which sets are currently at war and which are in a temporary Cold War. He knows that if a car with tinted windows slows down, it doesn't matter that the people on the sidewalk are wearing the same color as the people in the car. In the mechanics of the decentralized set, friendly fire is a misnomer. There is no friendly blue. There is only my blue and your blue. The shop owner keeps his head down, pays his insurance in the form of free goods or donations to the local set, and hopes that the next authorized war happens on a different block. The blue fracture is a study in brand cannibalism. The Crips created a brand so powerful and so recognizable that it became a victim of its own success. By allowing the organization to decentralize into hundreds of unled sets, they created a system where peace is mathematically impossible. Each set has its own grievances, its own economic needs, and its own internal politics. To bring peace to the Crips, one would have to negotiate hundreds of separate treaties simultaneously, a task that no one, inside or outside the organization, has the authority or the resources to undertake. This leads us to the harsh reality of the modern American street. The cycle of violence is not a bug in the system. It is a feature. The system is designed to consume the youth who enter it. It provides them with a sense of belonging and a set of rules, but those rules are designed to lead to either the cemetery or the cell. The Blue brand survives because it is a vampire franchise. It feeds on the desperation of the marginalized and the systemic failures of the city around it. As long as there is a lack of economic opportunity and a vacuum of legitimate authority, the decentralized set will continue to offer a solution that is more dangerous than the problem itself. The unifying theory of this investigation is that the U.S. street gang model has moved beyond the point of organizational control. It has become a self-sustaining ecosystem of conflict. The Blue fracture is the final stage of this evolution. It is the point where the identity becomes a weapon used against those who hold it. To break the cycle, one would have to do more than remove the leaders or the guns. One would have to dismantle the brand itself. But the brand is now global. It is in the music, the movies, and the fashion. The Blue identity has been commodified by the very society that fears it, ensuring that there will always be a new generation of 15-year-old CEOs ready to defend their street number to the death. As we look at the streets of South Central today, we see the remnants of a nation that never truly was. We see a collection of microstates, each with its own flag, its own army, and its own ledger of blood. The Blue Nation is a ghost story told to the youth to get them to join the front lines. The reality is much colder. It is a story of a franchise that failed its workers, a brand that consumed its creators, and a system that remains the most efficient engine for human tragedy in the American landscape. When we analyze the mechanics of the decentralized set, we are not just looking at a criminal organization. We are looking at the logical conclusion of a society that has abandoned its interior. The Blue fracture is the price of that abandonment. It is the sound of a community breaking under the weight of its own survival mechanisms. And as long as the brand remains more valuable than the lives of those who wear it, the fracture will only grow deeper. If this analysis of the structural mechanics behind street politics has provided you with a new perspective on the complexities of the American urban landscape, consider supporting this investigation. Your engagement allows us to continue documenting these systemic realities. Please subscribe to Tales from the Block for more in-depth sociological explorations. The transition from physical geography to digital territory has only accelerated this fragmentation. In the 1980s, a disrespect had to be witnessed in person or discovered through a tag on a wall. It was localized and had a delay. Today, the communication void has been filled by the instantaneous, high-velocity nature of social media. A teenager on 74th Street can broadcast a video of himself dropping the hand signal of a rival set on 83rd Street, and within minutes, that video has been viewed by every member of the opposing faction. In this digital landscape, the Blue fracture becomes a viral phenomenon. The lack of a central authority means there is no one to tell the teenager to delete the post. There is no one to explain that a 3-second video isn't worth a 20-year prison sentence. The technology has evolved, but the sociological structure remains primitive and decentralized, creating a lethal mismatch between the speed of provocation and the speed of mediation. Consider the role of the big homie in this digital age. In a centralized organization, an elder would serve as a gatekeeper of violence. He would understand that a social media post, while insulting, does not necessarily warrant a drive-by shooting that brings unwanted heat to the entire neighborhood. But in the decentralized model, the big homie is often just a man in his late 20s who is himself struggling to maintain relevance. He is not a CEO. He is a consultant who can be fired or worse if his advice is seen as weak. The power has shifted entirely to the shorties, the youngest members who have the least to lose and the most to prove. These are the frontline soldiers of the Blue brand, and they are operating in a vacuum of wisdom. The result is a cycle of retaliatory impulsivity, where every minor digital slight must be met with physical force to maintain the set's market share of respect. This leads us to the succession crisis. In any healthy organization, there is a clear path for advancement and a plan for leadership transition. In a Crips set, succession is a chaotic, accidental process. When a leader is removed from the equation, the set does not appoint a new head. Instead, it often splits again. 2 or 3 ambitious members will each claim the mantle, and because there is no corporate charter to resolve the dispute, they will form their own subsets. The 60s might split into the front side and the back side. The 83s might divide along even narrower lines. Each split further dilutes the blue identity and increases the number of potential targets. It is a biological process of cellular division, but instead of creating life, it creates more opportunities for death. The economic fallout of this fragmentation is felt most acutely by the non-players. Imagine a small grocery store owner whose shop sits on the border between 2 rival Crip sets. In a centralized system, he might pay a single protection fee to one entity. In the decentralized blue fracture, he is being taxed by both sides. If he allows a member of one set to loiter in front of his store, the rival set views the store itself as hostile territory. The economic lifeblood of the community is drained not just by the sets themselves, but by the investigative vacuum they create. Legitimate businesses refuse to open in these zones because the risk is too high and the management of the area is too unpredictable. The result is an economic desert, where the only thriving industry is the blue brand itself. Let us look at a Tuesday morning in a high school classroom in South Central. A veteran teacher, who has seen 3 generations of families pass through these halls, watches the seating chart. She notices that the boys from one housing project will not sit on the left side of the room, while the boys from the neighboring block will not sit on the right. They are all Crips. They all wear the same shade of blue. But in their minds, the 4-minute walk between their homes is an international border. The teacher knows that if she assigns a group project that forces them to collaborate, she is not just teaching history or math. She is navigating a minefield of set-tripping logic. The school, which should be a sanctuary of learning, becomes a neutral zone that is constantly under threat of being compromised. The mental energy these young men expend on tracking these invisible boundaries is energy that should be going toward their future. But in the decentralized set, the only future that matters is the next 15 minutes. The blue ledger also tracks the cost of the Prison Street feedback loop. When a member of a decentralized set goes to prison, the blue identity undergoes another transformation. Inside the California Department of Corrections, the blue fracture is often temporarily mended out of necessity. In the yard, Crip becomes a unified identity to survive against other ethnic or regional blocs. However, this unity is a transactional illusion. The moment these men are paroled and return to their specific street numbers, the old fractures reappear. The unity learned in prison does not translate to the streets of Los Angeles. In fact, the prison system often serves as a regional management training center, where young men are taught higher-level tactical skills and then sent back into a decentralized environment where those skills are used to exacerbate the local wars. This feedback loop ensures that the blue brand remains a high-turnover labor market. The prison system doesn't rehabilitate the gang member. It processes him, returning him to the street as a more efficient participant in the fracture. The state, in its failure to provide a legitimate alternative to the set, becomes a silent partner in the failed franchise model. The cost of housing these young men is a public tax that pays for the continuation of a war that has no objective and no end. The harsh reality of this investigation is that the decentralized set has become a self-correcting system of destruction. When a set becomes too large or too peaceful, the internal logic of the blue fracture triggers a new split or a new conflict. It is a system that abhors stability. Peace is bad for the brand because peace implies a lack of activity. In the twisted Darwinism of the street, to be active is the only way to maintain status. Therefore, the members are incentivized to find or create conflict, even with their own brothers. We see this in the forensic analysis of friendly fire incidents. When a drive-by shooting occurs on a Crip-on-Crip front line, the shooters often don't know the names of their targets. They only know the street number. They are firing at a ghost, a concept of an enemy that wears their own face. This is the ultimate thematic failure of the Crip organization. It started in 1969 as a localized response to police brutality and a lack of social services, a way to protect the community. By 2026, it has become the primary predator of that same community. The protector has become the parasite, and because it is decentralized, there is no brain to tell the body to stop eating itself. Consider the non-player mail carrier who has worked the same route for 20 years. He knows that he must wear a specific color of uniform, blue, but he also knows that his blue is neutral. He has developed a sixth sense for the atmospheric tension of a block. He can tell by the way the wind moves the trash in the street if a set is on edge. He has seen the toddlers he used to hand mail to grow into the young men who now stand on the corners with blue rags hanging from their pockets. He sees the blue fracture as a slow-motion tragedy, a generational theft of potential. He watches the blue brand consume the very children he once saw as the neighborhood's hope. To him, the blue nation is not a source of pride. It is a funeral shroud that is being woven one block at a time. The unifying theory of the blue fracture is that the decentralized model is the inevitable result of a power vacuum that was never filled by legitimate social or economic structures. When the state withdrew from the inner city, the set moved in. But because the set was born out of chaos, it could only produce more chaos. The blue brand is a synthetic identity for those who have been denied a real one. It offers a sense of history, a code of conduct, and a hierarchy, but it is all a mirage of sovereignty. The teenager on 60th Street doesn't own the sidewalk he is willing to die for. He doesn't own the blue color he wears. He is a tenant soldier in a war that was started before he was born and will continue after he is gone. This cycle is nearly impossible to break because the exit strategy is as decentralized as the entry strategy. There is no peace treaty that can be signed to end the blue fracture. A treaty between the 60s and the 83s does not stop the 40s from attacking the 50s. A ceasefire in one housing project does not translate to the next. The failed franchise model ensures that there is always a rogue operator who can reignite the entire system. The only way to truly dismantle the fracture is to provide a market alternative to the brand. This means replacing the blue ledger with a legitimate economic ledger, providing jobs, education, and safety that are more reliable and more rewarding than the set. But as long as the American ghetto remains a high-turnover labor market for the prison system, the blue fracture will persist. It is a structural necessity for a society that prefers to contain its problems rather than solve them. The blue brand survives because it is a convenient villain. It allows the world to look at the violence and see gang members rather than failed citizens. It allows the system to blame the brand rather than the conditions that created it. The philosophical reflection of this investigation leads us to a grim conclusion. The Crips are not an organization. They are an infection of the identity. They are what happens when a community's natural desire for belonging is hijacked by a system of decentralized violence. The blue fracture is the physical manifestation of a broken social contract. Every young man who falls to friendly fire is a testament to a world that offered him a blue rag because it had nothing else to give. The story of the blue fracture is not just a story of South Central Los Angeles. It is a warning about the dangers of identity decentralization in any society. When we lose our central narratives and our common authorities, we fragment into smaller and smaller tribes. We begin to see our neighbors as the other, even when they are wearing our same colors. We become set trippers in our own lives, defending our number while our nation burns around us. As the sun sets over the grid of Los Angeles, the blue fracture remains visible in every memorial candle on a sidewalk and every barred window on a storefront. The Blue Nation continues its failed franchise model, opening new sets in new cities, spreading the same mechanics of decentralization to a new generation. The brand is as strong as ever, but the people behind it are as vulnerable as they have always been. The blue brand lives forever. The blue soldier is lucky to make it to 21. In the final analysis, the blue fracture is a mirror. It reflects a society that has allowed its youth to become the fuel for a permanent state of war. It is a mirror that we must have the courage to look into if we ever hope to mend the fracture. Until then, the blue ledger will continue to be written in the blood of those who thought that wearing the color made them a king, only to find out it made them a target. If this deep dive investigation into the structural and sociological mechanics of the American street has offered you a clearer understanding of the forces that shape our urban realities, we ask you to join our community of thinkers and observers. This level of analysis is only possible through the support of an informed and engaged audience. Please consider subscribing to Tales from the Block for more continuous, unvarnished investigations into the hidden systems of the streets. To truly understand the depth of this fracture, we must examine the specific historical case study of the Slauson Corridor. In the early 1990s, this area was the epicenter of what many called the Great Truce. For a brief window, the decentralized sets attempted to formalize a central board to stop the internal bleeding. Leaders from the neighborhood Crips and the 8-Tray gangster Crips met in parks and neutral community centers. They spoke of blue unity and a collective economic front. But the failed franchise model proved to be a stronger force than the desire for peace. Because the leadership had no way to enforce the truce at the cellular level, a single personal dispute over a girl, a debt, or a disrespectful look on a street corner was enough to collapse years of negotiation. The peace didn't hold because the brand was too profitable for those at the bottom who saw war as their only path to advancement. This brings us to the mechanical incentive of violence. In a corporate structure, a junior executive is promoted based on quarterly earnings and efficiency. In the blue fracture, a shorty is promoted based on his activity. To the system, activity is a euphemism for high-risk violence. If there is no war, there is no way for a new recruit to build equity in the set. Therefore, peace is a direct threat to the career advancement of the next generation. The decentralization ensures that there is always a disruptor. A young man who realizes that by breaking the peace, he can bypass the senior leadership and establish his own name. This is the Darwinian glitch in the Crip identity. The organization is structurally incapable of rewarding peace. Let us return to the collateral lens of the non-player. We look at the intergenerational trauma of a single family in the Jordan Downs housing projects. The grandfather was a Crip in the 1970s, when the organization still held a semblance of political purpose. He remembers a time when the Blue Nation felt like a shield. His son, however, came of age in the 1990s during the height of the blue fracture. He didn't see a shield, he saw a target. He spent his life navigating the micro-warfare of the sets, eventually losing his life to a rival Crip set over a dispute involving a borrowed car. Now, the grandson is 15. He wears the blue rag, but he cannot tell you the history of the Blue Nation. He only knows the specific, localized grievances of his block. To him, the blue fracture is the natural state of the world. The trauma has been decentralized just like the gang. It is no longer a single, heavy weight, but a million tiny, sharp shards that pierce every aspect of daily life. This intergenerational cycle is the labor supply chain of the failed franchise model. The system does not need a king because it has tradition. The trauma acts as the middle management, ensuring that the recruits remain angry, paranoid, and ready to fight. The blue brand doesn't need to recruit in schools. It simply waits for the environment it created to push the children into its arms. It is a passive recruitment system that relies on the absence of hope. The mechanical void is also evident in the way the sets handle internal justice. In a centralized organization, if a member steals from the group, there is an internal trial and a regulated punishment. In the blue fracture, justice is vigilante and volatile. If a member of the 60s is suspected of snitching or backsliding, there is no higher authority to verify the claim. The punishment is often immediate and carried out by his own friends to prove their loyalty to the set. This internal purge creates a culture of extreme insecurity. Even within your own set, you are never truly safe. The blue rag offers no protection from the very people who wear it with you. This is the ultimate logical conclusion of a decentralized system. Eventually, the organization begins to view its own members as the primary threat to its survival. We must also consider the architectural enclosure of the American ghetto. The city planning of Los Angeles, the freeways that cut through neighborhoods, the lack of public transit, the food deserts, acts as the physical boundary of the fracture. These young men are trapped in a physical panopticon. They cannot easily leave their territory to seek work or education without crossing through hostile blue zones. The geography of the city reinforces the decentralization of the sets. Each set becomes an island, and the space between the islands is a dead zone. The infrastructure of the city itself becomes a weapon used by the Blue brand to keep its members contained and compliant. In the unifying theory of the streets, we must acknowledge that the Blue fracture is a symptom of sovereign failure. When the state fails to provide the basic requirements of a functioning society, safety, justice, and opportunity, the people will create their own parallel state. The Crips are that parallel state, but because they were born in a vacuum of resources, they could only build a state based on the extraction of blood. The Blue fracture is what happens when that parallel state reaches its Malthusian limit. There are too many soldiers, too many grievances, and not enough revenue to sustain them all. The system must then begin to consume itself to maintain its structural equilibrium. The Blue ledger finally closes on the concept of the empty brand. By 2026, the word Crip has been so thoroughly decentralized, diluted, and fractured that it has lost all original meaning. It is no longer a political statement, a social club, or even a unified criminal enterprise. It is a ghost variable, a label that young men use to justify their own destruction. The Blue fracture is the final autopsy of a dream that turned into a nightmare. It is the story of how a community's attempt to organize for survival became the very mechanism of its extinction. The harsh reality remains. There is no top to this organization. There is no head of the snake to cut off. The Blue fracture is a headless, mindless, and heartless machine that will continue to grind as long as the ghetto remains an extra-legal zone. To fix the fracture, we would have to fix the city. We would have to reintegrate these islands into the main body of society. But that would require a level of investment and political will that the system has shown no interest in providing. It is cheaper to let the Blue brand consume the youth than it is to provide the youth with a reason to live. As we look at the quiet streets of South Central at 3 a.m., we don't see the Blue Nation. We see a collection of dark corners, each guarded by a young man who is more afraid of his own brothers than he is of the police. We see a mechanical failure that has been normalized into a way of life. The Blue fracture is not a war that can be won. It is a condition that must be treated. But the medicine is expensive, and the patient has been forgotten. The philosophical reflection of this investigation ends where it began, with the color blue. It is a color that once represented the sky and the sea, vast, open spaces of possibility. On the streets of the Blue fracture, it has been compressed into the size of a bandana, used to blindfold a generation to their own potential. The blue is not a flag. It is a static noise that drowns out the possibility of a different future. As the sun rises over the Blue ledger of Los Angeles, the tally of the previous night's activity begins to circulate. Another set-tripping dispute, another friendly fire incident, another family left to pick up the shards of a shattered life. The machine continues to turn. The Blue brand remains vibrant, its marketing stronger than ever, while the humans behind the brand fade into the statistics of a failed franchise. This investigation has been a journey into the mechanics of the decentralized set, a look at the brutal logic that governs the Blue fracture. It is a story of how identity can be weaponized, how economics can be predatory, and how a lack of authority can lead to a permanent state of war. It is a story that is still being written, one block at a time, in the ink of the Blue ledger. To understand the streets is to understand the systems that move beneath the surface. If this analytical look into the Blue fracture and the failed franchise model of the American street has sharpened your perspective on the sociological realities of our time, your support is vital. This type of mature, long-form documentary storytelling relies on a community that values depth over sensation. Please consider subscribing to Tales from the Block and sharing this investigation with those who seek a higher-level understanding of the Blue Nation and the reality of the fracture.